Hello everyone and welcome back to GISC 1336. Today we're beginning Lecture 9, where we shift our attention to something that every surveyor in Texas will encounter, that is often confusing at first, the Texas Central Appraisal Districts, or CADs. We'll begin with an overview of the Texas Central Appraisal Districts, followed by their history and structure. Then we'll look into their authority and role in property administration, their place as cadastre in digital land systems, relevant legal precedents, comparisons with the Texas General Office, and conclude with insights on the GLO. So far in this course, we've explored boundaries, sites, plats, and construction staking, and even ALTA surveys. Each of those topics has dealt with the surveyor's responsibility to define, measure, and certify the physical reality of the land. But CADs are different. They represent an administrative system for property taxation in Texas. And while they rely on surveyors' data in many ways, they do not carry the same legal authority as a recorded plat or surveyor seal. So why does it matter for us? Because when you practice as a surveyor, you will inevitably deal with the CAD, their maps, and their records. Property owners will hand you CAD parcel maps as though they're boundary surveys. Engineers may use CAD records for preliminary design. Title companies may rely on CAD parcel numbers for documents. And yet, as we will discuss today, CADs were never designed to replace legal surveys. They exist to ensure fair and uniform taxation. In this lecture, we'll look at the history of CADs, their legal authority and role, and why they are sometimes referred to as a type of cadastre, a word we have touched on before, meaning an official record of property for taxation or administrative purposes. We'll then contrast CADs with the Texas General Land Office, which serves a very different function in land administration. And finally, we'll place CADs in the broader context of surveying practice in Texas, reminding ourselves of the professional distinctions between surveyor, certified boundaries, and administrative parcel maps. As we go through this, I want you to be thinking critically. Why does the public often mistake CAD records for legal surveys? What dangers arise from that confusion? And what is the surveyor's responsibility in clarifying these differences? This introduction should give you the frame of mind for what's ahead. CADs are essential for property taxation and public administration, but they are not surveys. Our job today is to explore both the overlap and the distinction, so you as future surveyors will be confident in how to navigate this system. Before 1979, Texas did not have the system of central appraisal districts that we know today. Instead, each taxing authority, cities, counties, school districts, and special districts, were responsible for appraising property values within its own jurisdiction. On paper, that may sound reasonable. In practice, it was a recipe for inconsistency and unfairness. Property owners often received multiple appraisals for the same piece of land, one from each taxing unit. These appraisals frequently didn't match. A county might appraise a parcel one way, while the school district appraised it differently, and the city assigned yet another value. Not only was this confusing for landowners, it was also unfair. Neighbors with nearly identical properties could end up with wildly different tax bills, depending on how aggressive or lenient the local appraisers were. This problem was serious enough that in 1979, the Texas legislature passed major reforms under the property tax code, which went into effect in 1982. The goal was to create unified, fair, and consistent appraisal systems. Instead of dozens of overlapping authorities, each setting their own values, the law created central appraisal districts for every county in Texas. Each CAD became the single agency responsible for appraising all property within its county for taxation purposes. And once the CADs set values, those values are shared with all the taxing units, the county, school districts, cities, and special districts, who then apply their own tax rates. In other words, CADs appraise taxing units' tax. The creation of CADs was not just an administrative change. It represented a shift in how property was treated under Texas law. It recognized that property value is a shared baseline, and that fairness in taxation depends on consistent measurement. For surveyors, this also meant that parcel boundaries and property descriptions began to be organized in centralized records, making CAD maps an important, even if imperfect, reference for land information. And each CAD is structured as its own independent unit, overseen by a board of directors. This board is drawn from representatives of the taxing jurisdiction within the county, such as cities, school districts, and special districts, ensuring that all entities who rely on the appraisal roll have a voice in its governance. The board does not control appraised values directly. Those are set according to state standards and professional practice. But the board does provide oversight of the CAD's administration, making sure it operates fairly and transparently. But it is still essential to remember CAD maps were designed to serve the tax system, not the legal survey system. That distinction, which we will continue to emphasize later, is at the heart of why surveyors must be careful when clients bring them CAD maps and expect them to serve as a boundary of proof. Now that we've covered why CADs were created, let's look more closely at their authority and role in Texas property administration. Each CAD is governed by the Texas Property Tax Code. Their primary responsibility is to appraise all taxable property in their county at its fair market value. That includes homes, businesses, farmland, and in some cases, even some forms of personal property. Once appraised, those values are certified in what's called the appraisal roll and delivered to each taxing unit. Counties, school districts, cities, and special districts then use that roll to calculate tax bills based on their own adopted tax rates. But CADs do more than simply assign values. They also maintain parcel maps, which show property boundary representations and parcel numbers for taxation purposes. They administer exemptions such as your homestead, your ag, or disabled veteran exemptions. And they coordinate the work of appraisal review boards, where property owners can contest valuations from appraisers. This all in turn provides public access to tax records, which have become a valuable source of information for researchers, planners, geospatial engineers, and yes, even surveyors. The end product of all of this work is the certified appraisal roll. And this roll is the official record of all property values in the county for that tax year. It is provided to each taxing unit and serves as the foundation for calculating tax bills. Importantly, the appraisal roll is not static. It is subject to change throughout the work of the Appraisal Review Board if property owners decide to protest their values. This process adds another layer of accountability to our legal taxation systems. And I know this may sound comprehensive, but we need to be clear about what CADs do and do not do. CADs do not establish legal boundaries. They do not resolve boundary disputes. They do not certify plats or surveys, and their maps are drawn specifically to serve taxation, not to meet the professional standards of surveying. This means that while CAD parcel lines may look like a boundary survey, they carry no legal weight in court of law or under our board rules. In addition to parcel maps, CADs also track ownership information. They maintain records of who owns each parcel by linking their maps to the deeds files um,
the deeds that are filed with the county clerk. This integration allows CADs to keep property ownership current for taxation purposes, even though, and this is critical, CADs themselves do not create or certify deeds. They are consumers of deed data, not producers of legal instruments. And this is where the confusion can easily arise for a property owner. Many people assume that the CAD map is legitimate, it looks official. It must be the same thing as a surveyor. And as surveyors, part of your professional role is to correct this misunderstanding. A CAD map can be a helpful starting point, but is not a substitute for a survey sealed by a registered professional land surveyor. I know the ideal of saving $500 on a title survey whenever you're purchasing your new home in a little subdivision seems really, really attractive, but you're setting yourself up for problems down the road as a homeowner. Um, so, in other words, go get it surveyed, please. And to take all that put together, we can summarize this section like this. CADs, they appraise property. They maintain parcel maps for taxation. They administer exemptions, and they certify appraisal rolls. Their authority is administrative, not legal. The surveyor's authority, by contrast, rests on field measurements, boundary law, and professional certification. When we describe CADs as part of an administrative cadastre, it opens up a much bigger conversation. To really understand their place in modern land administration, we need to look at how appraisal districts, cadastral systems, digital land records, and GIS all weave together in one interconnected framework about land. You see, a cadastre is more than just a map. It's a system. At its core, cadastre is a comprehensive record of property ownership, boundaries, and evaluations. It answers three essential questions. Who owns what? Where is it located? And how much is it worth? In Europe and much of the rest of the world, cadastres are the authoritative source of land ownership and taxation. In some countries, the cadastre itself replaces the needs for deeds, serving as the official record of property rights. However, Texas does not operate this way. Our system separates these two functions. The county clerk's office keeps official deed records. The surveyor defines and certifies boundaries. And the CADs manage appraisal maps and assign value for taxation. Together, these pieces form a fragmented but interdependent system that functions like a cadastre, even though we do not formally refer to it as one. And historically, all of this was done on paper. Deeds were handwritten, surveys were drawn in ink, appraisal maps were kept in large paper volumes at the courthouse. But today, land records have gone more and more digital. Most county CADs maintain GIS-based parcel databases, searchable by parcel IDs or owner names or even just an address. County clerks increasingly scan and post deed records online, and survey plats, once rolled up in drawers, are now stored in digital libraries that can be retrieved in seconds. This transition has made research easier, but also introduced new challenges. Digital systems allow wider access, but they can also give a false impression of precision. A parcel line on a GIS viewer looks authoritative, but as we've emphasized, it is only as accurate as the underlying data. The survey plat remains the gold standard, and it's the surveyor's responsibility to ensure that the digital version reflects reality. To appreciate how Texas compares, let's look abroad. In Scotland, the official cadastral map is maintained by the Registers of Scotland, and it's part of their system of land registration. Unlike CAD parcel maps, which are administrative and approximate. Scotland's cadastral map is a legally authoritative record of land rights. Each parcel, called a cadastral unit, is tied directly to the title register. The, the map records not just boundaries, but also ownership interests, burdens, and the rights associated with the land. This makes the Scottish cadastral system fundamentally different from how we do it here in Texas, where our CAD maps are a taxation tool that may not align perfectly with survey evidence. Scotland's cadastral map is binding. It is the legal definition of ownership. And in effect, it integrates what Texas spreads across multiple institutions, clerk records, survey plats, and appraisal rolls, into a single geospatial system. And bringing this comparison back home, you could see both the potential and the pitfalls. A unified cadastral map can streamline ownership, reduce disputes, and tie legal title to a visible geospatial record. However, without careful surveying and maintenance, even digital cadastral systems can carry forward errors. For Texas surveyors, Scotland's approach is a reminder that our role as custodians of accuracy and boundary law remain essential, even as digital systems continue to expand. So GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, is where all these strands can come together. GIS allows CADs to link parcel maps with ownership records, tax values, aerial imagery, and zoning overlays. It allows cities and counties to integrate surveying data with floodplain boundaries, utility networks, and transportation corridors. In practice, CADs rely heavily on GIS to maintain their parcel maps. But GIS is not limited to CADs. Engineers, planners, and surveyors all use GIS to provide context for their work. For you as a future surveyor, understanding GIS can be essential. It allows you to see how your certified survey ties into the larger geographic fabric, how your plat interacts with flood zones, or how your as-built survey updates a city's infrastructure database. Another layer is the rise of digital libraries. Many counties, universities, and even private organizations are digitizing historic plats, patents, and survey records. For example, the Conrad Blucher Institute has scanned hundreds of thousands of original land grant maps and survey notes, making them public accessible online via the Texas Digital Library. And these digital libraries allow surveyors to retrace historic evidence without always needing to visit a physical archive. This also aids in the preservation of these records. Every time they're touched, they're handled physically. We apply wear to them. The oils in our hands, the exposures of the environment around them, all will slowly degrade these documents with time. By digitizing them now and making them accessible, we're helping preserve that original record until it is absolutely necessary for it to come out. So the benefits are clear: greater access, faster research, more transparency, preservation of original records. But the risk, once again, is confusion. Clients may mistake a digital scan for a current survey. They may believe that because they found their parcel online, no further work is necessary. It is the surveyor's responsibility to distinguish between record evidence and field evidence, between archival material and certified retracement. Just as I'm trying to teach all of you right now as future land surveyors, how we overlap and can coordinate and work with other professions, the inverse of that is necessary too. We need GIS people who understand when a surveyor becomes necessary for their work. We need engineers to know, hey, can I set this elevation cert myself? Can I change, these stakes? When do I need to call the surveyor? What can I do on my side as a designer? Same for CADs. Learning each other a little bit about each other's professions allows us to better not just serve the public, but serve each other as well. And when you step back You can see that CADs, cadastral systems, digital land records, digital libraries, GIS are all part of this interwoven land information system. CADs appraise value. The Cadastre concept frames ownership and boundaries. GIS provides integration. Digital land records preserve deeds and plats. Digital libraries hold the history, and the surveyor ties them all together by verifying where the lines truly are on the ground. For surveyors, this means that your role is not only technical, but interpretive. You must know how to navigate between these systems, recognize their limits, and explain their meaning to clients. You must be able to say, yes, this CAD map is useful, but it is not proof of your boundary. Or yes, we found the original grant record in the GLO digital archive, but we still need to retrace the monumentation in the field. In short, CADs are part of a broader digital cadastre for Texas, but they are only one piece. The surveyor's seal remains the final authority in establishing property boundaries. And to switch from hyperbole to fact, let's make this a little more concrete and consider a real world type of problem that surveyors in Texas face. Imagine a property owner in Travis County downloads the CAD parcel map for their land. On the CAD map, the parcel shows as a neat triangle measuring exactly 1 acre, and the owner assumes this is the precise boundary. But when a surveyor is hired to retrace the deed, they discover that the deed calls for a tract, beginning at a point in the center of the old county road, running to a set iron pipe, then thence along the meanders of the creek. The actual surveyed area turns out to be 1.12 acres, with one side following the bend of the creek, not the straight line shown on the CAD map. So here's the problem. The CAD parcel was drawn for taxation purposes, using generalized deed descriptions or approximate GIS overlays. It straightened the creek into a line and it closed the tract as a rectangle, so it could be indexed and valued easily. But the legal boundary, certified by the surveyor, follows the natural feature, the creek, as called for in the deed. This is the difference between measurements and attributes. And this discrepancy created confusion. The landowner initially believed the survey was wrong because it didn't match the CAD map. The surveyor had to explain that the CAD map was a tax record, not a legal survey, and that the deed calls and monuments control. In the end, the CAD records were adjusted after the survey was filed, but only because the survey was provided as authoritative evidence. And Baker v. Light reinforces this point. In that case, the Texas Supreme Court made clear that when there is a conflict between generalized sketches or assumptions and the specific calls of a deed, the more certain evidence, the actual calls, the monuments, the measurements, will prevail. A CAD parcel map is essentially an assumption, much like a sketch. And while it may be useful for indexing and taxation, it cannot override deed calls or certified survey evidence. This case is a reminder that in Texas law, certainty in boundaries comes not from administrative maps, but from field evidence and the surveyor's application of boundary law. At this point, we've explored CADs in depth, their history, their role as an administrative cadastre, and their place in the digital landscape. But to truly understand how they fit within Texas land administration, we need to contrast them with another major institution, the Texas General Land Office, or the GLO. The CADs are focused on taxation. Their mission is to appraise property, maintain parcel maps for tax rolls, and provide valuation data to counties, cities, and school districts. Everything about CADs is driven by the principle of fair and uniform taxation. Their records are practical tools for appraisal, but they are not intended to establish legal title or boundaries. The GLO, by contrast, serves as the historic custodian of land in the state of Texas. Founded in 1836, the GLO is the oldest state agency in Texas, created in the same year Texas declared independence. Its primary role was to manage the vast public lands of Texas, issue land grants, and maintain the original survey and patent records. The GLO archives included the field notes of the earliest surveyors, the maps of Spanish and Mexican land grants, and the patents that transferred land from the sovereign to the private hands. This difference is critical. CAD parcel lines are administrative approximations. GLO records, on the other hand, document the very origin of property rights in Texas. These are not approximations. They are the foundation. If you want to trace the chain of title for a tract back to sovereignty, you must go through the GLO archives. And for surveyors, the contrast comes down to the function and authority. CADs function for taxation, with authority limited to appraisals. The GLO functions as the permanent record keeper of sovereignty lands, with authority rooted in history and statute. When you survey a tract today, you may consult both: the CAD map to understand how the property's been appraised, the GLO archives to retrace original surveys and grants. Another way to think of it is this: CADs tell us how the property is taxed. The GLO tells us how the property came to exist as a legal entity in the first place. Both are essential, but they serve very different ends. This comparison also underscores why clients often become confused. They see a CAD map and assume it has the same authority as a GLO patent or a survey plat. It does not. The CAD is an administrative convenience. The GLO is a historical foundation. As future surveyors, it'll be part of your job to help clients, attorneys, and even engineers understand this critical difference. Now that we've drawn a contrast between CADs and the GLO, it's time to take a closer look at the General Land Office itself. For surveyors in Texas, the GLO is more than just an archive. It is the foundation of land ownership in the state. The GLO was created in 1836, the same year Texas declared independence from Mexico. The Republic of Texas was land rich but cash poor, and distributing lands was one of the government's main ways of rewarding soldiers, attracting settlers, and raising revenue. To manage this process, the Republic created the General Land Office to issue grants, record patents, and keep survey field notes. When Texas joined the United States in 1845, it retained control of its public lands, unlike most other states. That decision made the GLO an enduring institution, continuing its role in managing lands and maintaining survey records. The GLO archives are vast. They include Spanish and Mexican land grants, early Republic field notes, original county surveys, and patents issued to private landowners. These records establish what surveyors call the chain of title back to sovereignty. In other words, if you trace ownership far enough back, the final link is a grant or patent recorded at the GLO. This makes the GLO the ultimate source for verifying the origins of property rights in Texas. For surveyors, the GLO serves critical purposes. First, it is a repository of original survey evidence. When you're retracing a boundary today, you may need to consult the GLO's archives to see the original field notes or maps that defined the tract when it was first granted. Those original calls, often to rivers, trees, or early monuments, are still controlling today. Second, the GLO provides access to digital archives. In recent decades, the agency has digitized thousands upon thousands of maps and field notes, making them accessible online. This makes research faster, but as we discussed earlier, digital access can also create confusion if clients mistake scanned records for current surveys. The GLO also manages state lands and resources. It oversees the Permanent School Fund, a financial endowment supported by revenues from state lands. It manages coastal lands, mineral rights, and even leases for energy development. While these administrative functions may seem far removed from daily surveying practice, they highlight the continued importance on the GLO in Texas land policy. In practice, surveyors will often turn to the GLO when deed descriptions don't line up or when evidence in the field is unclear. The GLO archives can confirm whether a call to a river in 1840 was intended to mean the center line of the river or the river bank as it existed at the time. They can also provide evidence when a monument has been lost or when modern property lines are in dispute. Courts in Texas recognize GLO records as authoritative evidence of original surveys. And as you know from our earlier lectures, original surveys control. Later errors or approximations must yield to the first call. So where CADs are administrative and modern, the GLO is historic and foundational. Together, they represent the two halves of the Texas land system, one that values property for taxation and one that preserves the origin of ownership. For you as future surveyors, the lesson is this. The GLO is not just a historical curiosity, but a working resource that you will rely on throughout your career. Now, as we close Lecture 9, let's step back and look at the big picture. Today, we've studied two very different institutions, the Central Appraisal Districts and the Texas General Land Office. At first glance, they may seem unrelated. One manages property taxation today, the other preserves land grant records from nearly 2 centuries ago. But together, they illustrate two sides of Texas land administration, the modern administrative side and the historic foundational side. The CADs exist for one purpose, to ensure fair and uniform taxation. They appraise property, maintain parcel maps, and administer exemptions. Their parcel lines are convenient and widely accessible, especially in digital GIS systems, but they are not authoritative for boundary determination. As surveyors, you must always remember and remind your clients that CAD maps are administrative approximations, not legal surveys. The GLO, by contrast, represents the deep historical roots of Texas property. It archives and preserves the field notes, maps, and patents that form the original evidence ownership. Every chain of title in Texas eventually leads back to a GLO grant. For surveyors, these records are more than history. They are often critical evidence in boundary retracement, resolving conflicts, and establishing certainty in the field. And together, CADs and the GLO highlight the interconnected systems that you will navigate as professionals. You will work with administrative parcel maps, digital land records, geospatial databases, and historic field notes. You will explain to clients why a tax map is not a survey, why a scanned plat is not current, and why the surveyor's seal remains the final authority on the ground. This lecture also is tied back to earlier themes. Back in Lecture 5, you remember the case law that established how boundaries must be interpreted under Texas law. From Lecture 6, you saw how site surveys serve construction. Lecture 7, we learned about alignments, profiles, and GIS integration. All of these come together in today's lesson. Surveying is not just about measuring land. It is about navigating systems of evidence, administration, and law, and understanding how they overlap and diverge. So the takeaway is this. As future licensed surveyors, you must not only understand the technical process of surveying, but also the institutional framework of land records. CADs, Cadastre, digital systems, and the GLO all play a role. But at the end of the day, it will always be your responsibility to apply boundary law, retrace monuments, and certify what is true on the ground. This is the professional weight of surveying in Texas, and it's why mastering these distinctions will be critical in your career.